What was decided by ICC judges in Al Mahdi case?
On 27 September 2016, Trial Chamber VIII of the International Criminal Court unanimously found that Ahmad Faqi Al Mahdi was guilty beyond reasonable doubt as a co-perpetrator of the war crime consisting in intentionally directing attacks against religious and historic buildings in Timbuktu, Mali, in June and July 2012. The Chamber sentenced Mr. Al Mahdi to 9 years imprisonment. The time spent in detention since his arrest upon the ICC warrant issued on 18 September 2015 will be deducted from the sentence.
What were the factual findings of the judges?
In January 2012, a non-international armed conflict took place in the territory of Mali. In the context of and in relation to that conflict, armed violence took place and led to different armed groups taking control of the north of the country. In early April 2012, following the retreat of Malian armed forces, the groups Ansar ad-Din and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, took control of Timbuktu. From then until January 2013, Ansar ad-Din and AQIM imposed their religious and political edicts on the territory of Timbuktu and its people. They did so through a local government, which included an Islamic tribunal, an Islamic police force, a media commission, and a morality brigade called Al-Hisba. Mr. Al Mahdi was viewed as an expert on matters of religion and was consulted in this capacity, including by the Islamic tribunal. Mr. Al Mahdi was very active in aspects of the Ansar ad-Din and AQIM administration. He led the Hisba from its creation in April 2012 until September 2012 and wrote a document on its role and objectives. In late June 2012, the leader of Ansar ad-Din made the decision to destroy the mausoleums in consultation with 2 prominent AQIM members. Mr. Al Mahdi was also consulted by the governor of Timbuktu before this decision was made and expressed his opinion that all Islamic jurists agree on the prohibition of any construction over a tomb, but recommended not to destroy the mausoleums so as to maintain relations between the population and the occupying groups. Nevertheless, instruction was given to Mr. Al Mahdi in his capacity as the chief of Al-Hisba, and despite his initial reservations, Mr. Al Mahdi agreed to conduct the attack without hesitation on receipt of the instruction. Mr. Al Mahdi wrote a sermon dedicated to the destruction of the mausoleums, which was read at the Friday prayer at the launch of the attack. He personally determined the sequence in which the buildings were to be attacked. The attack itself was carried out between around 30 June 2012 and 11 July 2012. 10 of the most important and well-known sites in Timbuktu were attacked and destroyed by Mr. Al Mahdi and other individuals. All these sites were dedicated to religion and historic monuments and were not military objectives.
What was the role of Mr. Al Mahdi in the commission of the crime?
In respect of the role played by Mr. Al Mahdi, the Chamber considered that Mr. Al Mahdi's contributions collectively qualify as essential. The Chamber found that Mr. Al Mahdi knew that he exercised joint control over the attack and was fully implicated in its execution. He was the head of the Hisba, one of 4 primary institutions established by Ansar ad-Din and AQIM upon occupying Timbuktu. He had overall responsibility for the execution phase of the attack, supervising the execution of the operations, using the Hisba's members, and determining the sequence in which the buildings would be destroyed, making the necessary logistic arrangements, and justifying the attack to the broader world through media interviews. He also was present at all of the attack sites, giving instructions and moral support, and he personally participated in the attack that led to the destruction of at least 5 sites.
Did the Chamber take into consideration Mr. Al Mahdi's admission of guilt?
On 22 August 2016, at the opening of the trial, Mr. Al Mahdi admitted guilt to the war crime consisting in attacking 10 historic and religious monuments in Timbuktu, Mali, between around 30 June 2012 and 11 July 2012. In its judgment, the Chamber was satisfied that the accused understands the nature and consequences of the admission of guilt, and that his admission was voluntarily made after sufficient consultation with defense counsel and is supported by the facts of the case.
How did the judges determine the sentence against Mr. Al Mahdi?
To determine the 9-year sentence, the Chamber took into consideration the gravity of the crime, Mr. Al Mahdi's culpable conduct, and his individual circumstances. The Chamber also considered that the targeted buildings were not only religious buildings, but had also a symbolic and emotional value for the inhabitants of Timbuktu and constitute a common heritage for the community. Furthermore, all the sites but one were UNESCO World Heritage Sites. As such, the attacks on them appear to be of particular gravity, as their destruction does not only affect the direct victims of the crimes, but also people throughout Mali and the international community. The Chamber also considered 5 mitigating circumstances, namely Mr. Al Mahdi's admission of guilt and the fact he showed honest repentance and provided a detailed account of his acts, Mr. Al Mahdi's cooperation with the prosecution despite potential security implications for his family in Mali, Mr. Al Mahdi's remorse and the empathy he expressed with the victims, including his call on people not to become involved in similar conduct, Mr. Al Mahdi's initial reluctance to commit the crime and the steps he took to limit the damage, and finally, even if it is of a limited importance, Mr. Al Mahdi's good behavior in detention. In order to sufficiently and adequately reflect the moral and economic harm suffered by the victims of the case and fulfill the objectives of sentencing, the Chamber imposed a 9-year sentence that it deemed proportionate to the gravity of the crime and the individual circumstances and culpability of Mr. Al Mahdi.
Where will Mr. Al Mahdi serve his sentence?
Individuals convicted of crimes falling within the ICC's jurisdiction do not serve their sentence in the ICC's detention center in The Hague in the Netherlands, but in a national establishment of a state which has agreed to receive the convicted. Decisions on this issue should be made in due course by the ICC in dialogue with relevant states.